there really was nothing else like Assassin's Creed. Oh, today it's synonymous with conformity, the greatest of Ubisoft's soulless cash cows. But still, people flock to idolize and remember everything that made Assassin's Creed special, what you couldn't get from any other game. Unity's the one that gets all the attention in the YouTube shorts, because it's the prettiest, and perhaps because it best embodies the note of tragedy that underlies the strangely intense nostalgia for this franchise. But Assassin-ness has always been turning heads, never more so than when it was new, 15 years ago. The hoods, the hidden blades, the history, and the sci-fi too, the strange blend of past and future that made something special of the music, art, and story. But most of all, what made it special was what it let you do. AC's iconic mechanic, parkour, a precise, rebellious, and stylish form of movement whose appeal you just couldn't get from any other type of platforming. And it wasn't just on set routes, you could parkour anywhere. Call me Kate Bush, cause I'd be running up that road, running up that hill, and running up that building. Neither freedom of movement or parkour would have been remarkable alone. Other open worlds existed, many of which included comprehensive movement systems, and other parkour games existed, like the series Assassin's Creed was originally meant to be a part of. But that much freedom, with the fidelity and appeal of parkour, that was new. That was remarkable, and that, for Ubisoft, was also a unique challenge. In Assassin's Creed, the average player had to be able to land on a thin beam from tens of different heights and angles. Most games, including most good platformers, would meet such a demand for precision with after-the-fact control. A double jump to reset momentum, mid-air control to redirect it, a glide, a dash. But this was a realistic world. Altair can't fly, which meant it all came down to the snap targeting system. Jump reasonably near a pole and you'll snap to the pole. Jump reasonably near a ledge and Altair will provide a little aim assist, with what we would struggle to do alone. And it worked, which was commendable because there are many ways snap targeting can fail. It could have prioritized angles or object types that don't line up with what players actually want. It could have done too little, or worse, too much. And it did have its imperfections. Nobody wants to jump on top of a barrel, Ubisoft, or the first steps of a parkour starter when parkour is already underway. But usually, it was predictable and consistent and freedom went unharmed. An auto parkour function was implemented for accessibility's sake, removing the need for individual jump inputs so long as the button was held. And catch ledge was a second supporting measure to provide the player as much mid-air control as could believably exist. By guiding our arms to a desired handhold, we are allowed to customize and course-correct our jumps without the need to defy physics. Within an admittedly limited range, we can save ourselves from our own mistakes, and most importantly, the mistakes of the snap targeting. The result, for the time, was remarkable. Unpolished and basic, but remarkable. What was perhaps most surprising of all, though, was the strength of parkour's connection to the rest of the game around it. Story, soul, history. This wasn't a gimmick. Parkour belonged in Assassin's Creed. The conditions and architecture of centuries past contributing both a believable basis for complex environments and a meaningful rarity to the tallest buildings, which meant the time it took to climb them never bored, but only added to the satisfaction of reaching the top and being met with magic. The wonders of the old world, rendered with a new creative atmosphere of techno-ethereal mysticism. Even the height itself meant something. All it took was one mistake. There was thrill because there was danger. The heights of Assassin's Creed are unmatched and timeless, and a rare bliss in an otherwise dark, brutal game. A darkness that parkour was no less in touch with. It never seemed absurd for a murderer to be prancing around on rooftops. In fact, it only emphasized the fantasy as you stalked your prey from above. Even the thematic ideas that cast the Brotherhood as objective seekers of truth found connection with movement, as you and your castle peered down through the rabbles of faith and dogma below. You had a literal freedom they did not. And like those many debates on how much that really meant with Al-Mualim, there was one more thing it had: depth. You'd find it in the relationship of your moveset to the level design. Take the average wall, for instance, and pay attention to my speed. Do you see how I started very quickly with the wall run, then slowed once I began to scale it? The simplest form of depth in Assassin's Creed is searching for ways to scale less and to wall run more. What you want are platforms close to the height at which a wall run would end, on which to place your feet, so that you can quickly begin another wall run. In simpler terms, what you want is stairs, and take a look around. There are a lot of stairs to choose from. The cities of Assassin's Creed were an elaborate kerplunk arrangement of beams, poles, walls, and roofs, a parkour jungle. The skill, of course, was finding the best way to get where you're going in the least amount of time. Jump ejects to the side and to the back played a critical role, vastly expanding what objects could be used as stairs. Almost nowhere now existed that couldn't be optimized in numerous distinct ways. A second layer to the depth came from the ability of ejects time climbed at the very height of a wall run to skip the slow pull-up at the end of a normal climb. With some setup, usually by ejecting from an adjacent wall, you could hop instead of clamber, and the advanced player would weave this in with stair-seeking to climb buildings in mere moments. Ejects could also extend your maximum reach, allowing you both to incorporate previously inaccessible targets into pathfinding and to skip clambers in another way. If an upcoming object on a parkour pathway is far enough to force the use of your hands, you could use the adjacent wall as a launch point to extend the reach of your legs. The peaks of slanted roofs could be used with a smart manual jump to a similar end. Higher jumps mean less scaling or no scaling. Catch ledge contributed the final layer of mastery. This wasn't just a safety net, it was a connective. Extend your jump by catching, then ejecting, to skip a small amount of scaling, to continue on an otherwise interrupted parkour pathway, precisely align a follow-up move by jumping then catching in a specific place, a back eject across the street, a side eject into swing. Possibility for pathing and potential for intelligent play had not just risen so much as multiplied. For so old and so simple a system, the skill ceiling on Assassin's Creed 1 is staggeringly high. The good player is instantly distinguishable from the poor player because they see the better route, and they won't screw up the button inputs, and the extremely good player is distinguishable once again. Long after button skill has been mastered, your pathfinding ability can still improve until you're thinking 5 to 10 inputs ahead. I've enjoyed jumping about in these games for over a decade, and even now I'm impressed by how much better than me some people are on YouTube. But I don't want to give a false impression. Parkour was not perfect. For one, there was a limit to how far you could think ahead, and that was however long it took to run into a bug. There is no such thing as a polished Assassin's Creed, but the first game? Zoo-wee mama. And when it came to things happening unexpectedly, it wasn't always bugs to blame. Have you ever felt that the assassins had a mind of their own? You'd climb things by accident, make jumps you didn't intend, fly off roofs out of nowhere. Well, they didn't have a mind of their own. They did exactly as you instructed, but that doesn't mean it's your fault. The fault lies with a batshit control system that makes misinterpretation a constant danger. Let me paint a picture for you. The parkour button and the run button are the same button. Their function changes with the environment. Sounds simple. Sounds innocent. It's no big deal in Batman or Metal Gear Rising. But do those games do everything similarly? Can Batman wall climb on any wall? Does everything in his environment represent a parkour possibility? And are they all packed closely together? When he makes a mistake, are the consequences harsh? Does he lose a lot of time or health? No. But all these things are true in Assassin's Creed, and that is a recipe for disaster. Imagine, you're running through a tight passage, but you make just enough contact with one of the sides, so now you're climbing it instead. You're running through a marketplace and the same thing happens, but now you're hopping on tables and getting stuck on boxes of fruit. Or how about this? You're running on a roof. You reach the end, but you don't just fall off, which catch ledge could always save you from. You leap off. That's not normal for a platformer, or expected by the inexperienced. Something as simple as requiring a fresh input when the function changes might have made a difference. It didn't. It's instant. As taught by Leo K, implementing a form of button discipline could serve as a band-aid solution for the advanced player. Simply release the legs button and you'll drop to a light jog. No more auto parkour. Most, however, were not accustomed to this control scheme or having to punish themselves by losing speed in return for basic control of their character. Most would at best develop a semi-reliable fear of roof edges instead. This is so fundamental a part of Assassin's Creed that to call it a problem does feel weird, but Ubisoft's stubborn belief that more actions on fewer buttons is always best has never given rise to anything but bad ideas. Auto parkour itself is another such example. For as long as the button is held, you parkour. It can't pathfind for you or implement technique, but it can move at a pace that is not unacceptable. If you can get by with an absent mind, it's problematically convenient for the efficiency-oriented brain to stay absent-minded, to stay complacent. I'm less likely to think about a jump if I'm letting it happen instead of making it happen. I'm less likely to consciously plan ahead or to improve. The apathy encouraged by auto parkour and the hostility of the control system to the new player's confidence both contribute to a wider and deeper problem with parkour. The deepness problem, that the depth of Assassin's Creed's movement does not make itself as accessible as it should be. Despite its largely casual player base and that those most in need of depth likely have the experience to find it, there are many between. Too many who could have coped and would have cared for something beyond the surface, but never got the push they needed. And there is one contributor that stands clearly above the rest: the stunning incompetence of Assassin's Creed's tutorialization. It doesn't take a genius to intuit how jumps could be used to your advantage, but many of the game's advanced techniques do not lend themselves to simply being discovered without a guiding hand. It's a lot more challenging to intuit that ejects can skip clambers. It has no basis in reality. We needed a mentor, and we never got one. The optional assassin tombs of classic Creed were good for many reasons, one of which was the high demand they placed on the player's mastery of the controls, but never did they take the opportunity to teach technique beyond the rare demand of an isolated back eject, which stunningly wasn't enough, both because a useful application of ejects in practice involves scanning a complex environment for the best place of many to use one, not just remembering the correct controls when it is the only viable move, but also because 500,000 people still needed a YouTube video even to do that, for the one mandatory side eject in Assassin's Creed 2's campaign. What were the creators thinking? What weren't they teaching? Until Brotherhood's VR course, you didn't even get a bad tutorial for Catch Ledge. You're told you've unlocked it, but not how to use it, or what it does. And if you need any more convincing, just watch this. That is the vault mechanic, and there's a good chance you're surprised. They don't even tell you it exists. It only exists in Assassin's Creed 1. As explained by No Nostalgia, you do it by holding the drop button at the exact moment of jumping from one non-standing object to another non-standing object. That's a beam or a pole where you're perched, not standing. Right, but why do you have to start from one in order to vault over another? Good question, considering that with how hard it is to time, and you can imagine why so few ever learned of its existence, which is a damn shame. The cool factor of vaulting is undeniable, as is the boost it provides to the skill ceiling, and its utility in a game where short drops can look rough and take time. No, the setup doesn't make sense, nor do moments like this. But is that an excuse for removing a good and useful mechanic from every subsequent game until the introduction of controlled descent in Unity, denying them all a higher potential? Is that an excuse for pretending a good and useful mechanic doesn't exist in the one game it actually does? The role of mentor has fallen instead to YouTubers like Leo K, JSers, Altair Stealth, and Kinography, without whom this video would be a lot shorter. I wouldn't know what a vault is, and I, like many others, would be so close yet too far from a better Assassin's Creed. How many more would have seen it if Ubisoft had done their job themselves? So began Assassin's Creed's troubled relationship with its own potential. There was a final problem with parkour. Like the bugs, it was another problem Assassin's Creed 2 would go on to address: the level design. Wait a second, the level design's good, isn't it? Yeah, it's really good, but it's always good in similar ways. The criticism of AC1 is its repetitive design, despite using the same core systems as any other Assassin's Creed. There were big lessons to learn about the importance of varying the order of the core systems and their narrative context. But there was one thing the conversation completely overlooked, that Assassin's Creed 1 is mostly made of movement, and moving doesn't feel much different from Acre to Damascus to Jerusalem. If it weren't for the colors, it'd often be hard to tell which city is which. Short buildings, similar gaps, similar arrangements of beams, similar market stalls, similar roof shapes. There's a lot of the same challenge, as if you were always fighting the same type of enemy. And to better understand the effect, you need only look to what happens when you change it. Assassin's Creed 2's mission was variation in level design. What was once many similar challenges was now many new and different ones, as objects and geometry were constantly reconfigured, no matter the cost of making certain areas look gamified. The way Monteriggioni shifts height at the ground level, the way its buildings rise and fall and connect together. It's as intricate as anything in Assassin's Creed 1, but with none of the predictability. You can't turn a corner without encountering an arrangement you haven't seen before, and the next time you come to that corner, it'll probably be from a different angle, on a different level, and you'll interact with it as if for the first time. You're always solving different problems in Assassin's Creed 2, and that makes the average experience of parkour considerably more engaging. But there is something more to this, a change caused by level design of personality. In Assassin's Creed 1, parkour felt like practice. In Assassin's Creed 2, it feels like play. As change becomes constant, so does a sense of expressiveness. It drops its mathematical character and better reflects Ezio's. Because the level design is fresh, it feels like a free run. And though there's every chance it's just a coincidence, this ludo-narrative bonus does feed into a very conscious change. Parkour lost its thematic relevance as an objective bird-like view, but it gained a new artistic dimension. The joy of flight, the youth and wonder of movement. Ezio connects with lawless thieves on the rooftops of Venice and his damned brother in Florence. He races with competitors at the carnival and soars above Venice in Da Vinci's flying machine to the most uncompromisingly joyous track Jesper Kyd has ever composed for Assassin's Creed. Never again would Assassin's Creed be so in touch with its core mechanic. Never again would that artistic connection contribute so much to the experience of parkour and to the vibe of the game at large. Still, Assassin's Creed 2's refinement of level design went deeper. Yeah, cities repeatedly mixed up the form of the challenge, but on the larger scale, they also made a tactical use of certain consistencies to characterize the setting. Tuscany's use of extreme height differences is apparent and important throughout. Its towers, its descending streets. The rivers of Venice, meanwhile, can act as obstacles, crash mats to make quick and safe descents, or as highways with use of the surprisingly fast gondolas. Even the simpler Forlì is instantly distinguishable from Florence by its level design alone. The variation within Assassin's Creed 2 exceeds the variation across multiple later games to follow. But what's especially important about Assassin's Creed 2's large-scale differences is that they allow it what the first game could never have: escalation. Florence's core characteristic is this: it's an excellent tutorial level. It's not boring, but it is modest, rarely displaying the same degree of intricacy as Tuscany or Venice, and with buildings rarely taller than 3 stories. The consequences for failure were low. It plays as homely as it feels. But with time, the game gets harder, more complex and taller. Buildings are rarely shorter than 4 stories in Venice, and as the tension of gameplay rises, so reflected is the rising narrative tension. Threat could be made to feel real through the threat of the sandbox. Assassin's Creed 2 showed where Assassin's Creed 1 told. But Venice wasn't just the hardest city in the game, it was the best, and by far the most interesting. Why? We'll see. But first, I have to do what the kids call dropping a red pill. The liberal elite doesn't want you to know this, but technically, parkour in Assassin's Creed is a complete waste of time, in the sense that it's always slower to your destination than running through the streets. Arguably, the ideal speed dynamic would have been if it was sometimes slower and usually faster. There would be a new layer of skill expression in identifying which method of movement was best at any given time. But there isn't. It's always slow. And as stinky a red pill as that may be, it's not actually the remarkable thing. What's remarkable is that parkour is as fast as it is. A system whose ultimate goal is to travel on the x-axis that spends half its time getting hung up on the y-axis is going to struggle with efficiency. But Classic Creed did its best to help, to make it seem fast enough that most would not even notice it is slow. The first and most fascinating method was the use of crowds, which are important for far more than blending. Assassin's Creed takes human-to-human collision very seriously. If someone stumbles into you, you will stumble. If you run into an NPC, you will both feel it. And if, during the feeling it phase, you run into another NPC, you'll fall to the ground. You can get around this punishment by holding tackle to bash people out the way, but the tackle state reduces top speed. So, there's a small challenge in attempting to hold tackle for only the short time necessary. When your attention is elsewhere, that can be harder than it seems. What's most important though is that the lethargy of wading through crowds is incentive to avoid them entirely, to go up. Technically, they weren't that much of an obstacle, but they were annoying, intentionally so. They felt like an obstacle, and it felt like a weight had been lifted off your shoulders when you climbed to the freedom of the roof level, from where we can see Classic Creed's simpler techniques clearly. Until Unity's Paris, buildings were not one-to-one scale. They were smaller in relation to the assassin, which made it relatively quicker to scale their height and to cross their narrower street gaps. The streets themselves were just as important. Ubisoft may not have been able to make them slow, but they could certainly slow them down, which is where the meandering maze-like layout of ancient city planning came in handy. Not all streets were indirect, not even most of them, but many of them, especially those in Tuscany and Florence, and for every one, parkour became faster by comparison. But there was nowhere it was faster than Venice, where half the streets are rivers, where bridges are required to cross them on foot, where those bridges are often very sparse, and where the city layout is as indirect as Tuscany. Parkour had been inconvenienced, but the streets far more so. Never again would the roofs feel so fast in comparison. New York's direct, grid-like environment made the inefficiency of Connor's movement perpetually clear. It's always disheartening to be on the back foot during a chase and to understand that your only real hope of catching up is to stop moving like an assassin. By now, Ubisoft fully understood that most players had enough intrinsic motivation to parkour regardless of its blatant inefficiency, in the same way they would usually give stealth a fair shot, even though combat was always quicker and easier. But for all Connor's grace and for all Arno's style, that sense of speed, that sense moving this way was something logical, would never again be felt. There was more to Venice than just feeling fast, however. The boats. What a wonderful way to breathe life into movement. Not just varying the mechanics with a timing challenge on the row, but also varying the fantasy. It's historical, it's offensively beautiful, it's yes but kid, it's fucking wow. And because they couldn't access every part of the map, you couldn't just stick to them either. But that's not all. Remember the ideal dynamic for speed? The one where it would sometimes be faster to parkour and sometimes faster to do something else? Well, Venice has it, but between all on-foot travel and travel by boat. The gondolas were fast, the rivers were everywhere, so depending on their direction, they were sometimes the best choice. Clearly so. You didn't need a stopwatch to tell, and the ever-changing weave of the rivers meant that at some point soon, it would be reasonable to leave the boat and begin moving another way, maintaining a cycle of choice and change. Venice was made for Assassin's Assassin's Creed. Only once would I again wonder which method of traversal was best, or make a choice between them, and it was not the horses of Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. When you get on a horse in Brotherhood, the time at which it will be reasonable to get off the horse will never come. They're always close or instantly summonable. They can access every part of the map, which means no degree of change is guaranteed. They no longer stumble whilst galloping through crowds at full speed, which means they're never inconvenient, which prevents any dynamic of choice emerging in the tight urban environments of Rome. But balance is not really the problem. Horses mattered because Rome was big, but despite their importance, they became less interesting to ride. You can't even periodically shove carrots up their ass like Ocarina of Time. And that's really all there was to say. For most players, there are hidden mechanics in Brotherhood, not so hidden as the vault in AC1, but hidden enough to surprise most people who played it. Did you know that the beam flip allows you to seamlessly transition between mounts in parkour, and that the tackle mount lets you do the same thing backwards? Horse parkour had flow, style, and if the setting was right, a remarkable amount of utility. Whistle and tackle mount for a rapid escape. Reposition mid-fight with a beam flip into wall run, allowing you to scale a building in seconds and deal with that pesky archer. If you were good, you could flip, parkour, and jump mount back onto your horse before it even stops moving. Horse parkour is the best thing Brotherhood does with movement, and the best thing Assassin's Creed would ever do with mounts. Who knew? That's not a rhetorical question. Rome, on the other hand, was the first city big enough to be the only city in a mainline Assassin's Creed, and the advantages were simple. Scale is appealing. Rome felt massive. That felt good. And it felt fitting for Rome, the seat of Templar power and the sequel to Ezio's humble origins, to feel so large. Its size gave it legitimacy, but the disadvantages were inevitable. It was just one city, and it, like every entry after, seemed less willing to flagrantly gamify the level design than Assassin's Creed 2. Rome stayed loyal to architectural consistency and a more believable cleanliness around it, and although the level design remained strong, there was less variation across the districts of Rome's 1.4 square kilometers than Venice's 0.4. Rome offered a lot of the same challenge, and parkour in turn became less creative and less engaging. When it comes to movement, there is no question of which game I'd rather play. Assassin's Creed 2 took the basic template the first game laid and mastered it. Though it suffered for a lack of vaulting, it mostly left me wanting more. More parkour, more than ejects and wall runs, more than the first game's basic template. Make a good system great. Parkour had so much potential, so much more to be, and to add. So, people want a modern-day Assassin's Creed, but how are you going to start a Brotherhood when everyone's isolated indoors all the time? Unless, that's right baby, a fucking Squarespace website. Twitter's useless and Reddit's... What you need is a way to concentrate your entire online presence, including social media, everything you write and everything you sell, under one domain of your choosing that can be easily intuited and remembered by your customers, audience, or friends. A domain that you can also buy from Squarespace. And yes, websites are hard to design, but Squarespace makes it easy. Snappable quadrants, detailed yet simple customization, preset color schemes, or a full palette for experimentation. And you don't need to pay a dime to try it. Cards only required when you're ready to publish, at which point, use code Whitelight at squarespace.com/whitelight for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. You gotta admit, that's quite a revelation. Brotherhood's sequel, Ezio's End. Revelations was the controversial chapter of Classic Creed, for its focus on story at the sacrifice of content, for its new mystical tone and its half-baked mechanical additions, for its abandonment of Italy for the crossroads of the world, Constantinople, my favorite city of them all. God, it was a wonder. The falling petals, the sunburnt skyline, the rich and endless culture. You had to cut through the atmosphere with a knife, and you would. Constantinople did a lot for movement too, but not all of it was appreciated. It was big, just like Rome. Technically, it was bigger, because Rome was mostly countryside, but on either side of the Bosphorus, Constantinople was a city. Fully. And only. It was bigger than Rome, it was also more uniform, but that did not mean homogeny for movement, because on the small scale, Constantinople made a remarkable effort. Its streets weren't as straight as Rome, its verticalities went nearly as wild as Tuscany, reconfiguration was strong, and all whilst being the densest city Assassin's Creed had seen since the first game. Those height differences were magnified by their close proximity, and even though it emphasized play on the y-axis, you never felt slower, because Ezio had a trick up his sleeve. Literally, it was the hook blade. With reach and leverage now massively extended, he could climb and leap quicker than ever before. For a sequel, a speed boost made sense. People were used to the parkour of Classic Creed by now, so let them get a move on. And no one wanted to see Ezio's age slow him down, so let his walking stick speed him up. God, did it feel good to do so. The sound of the latch, the bounce of the momentum, nice. You'd use it just to feel it. Inevitably, however, there was a problem. The relationship of the level design to the assassin's moveset that forms the basic core of parkour's depth failed to fully account for the power of the hook blade. In Constantinople, climbing walls of wall-run height without any setup or any technique could be just as fast, if not faster, than the smarter touch. Ejects were still powerful and stair-seeking was still an important strategy for taller structures, but it was always deflating in the not uncommon moments where you felt a skill refined over 3 previous games had become worthless, and the hook blade's disruptions did not end there. Because Ezio would only use the hook blade when he needed the extra reach, he'd go back to his old clamber on shorter runs, which up to a certain point made it slower to climb shorter walls than taller walls. But what was truly weird about the hook blade was its rarest but most useful combo. When you hook blade climb leap, Ezio will sometimes add a very useful finisher. He'll rapidly bring you up over the final feet of the building and its roof, even if the roof juts out. Well, thanks Ezio. But the reason this extremely quick way to climb walls isn't very harmful to the balance, and yet deeply frustrating, is that there is no obvious, logical, or intuitable consistency for when Ezio will do it. You'd assume it's buildings where Ezio has space to climb leap, then again onto the roof. But it isn't. Why not this building? And why this one? The only consistent thing about trying to get it is the frustration of being punished with a time loss of several seconds as you slowly clamber up what you hoped Ezio would skip for no clear reason. But the hook blade had its upsides too, because it didn't just make Ezio faster, it let him do more things. Like lamp jumps, for instance, that augmented the corner swing from Assassin's Creed 2 with an optional leap forward. Aside from the considerable expansion it brought to pathfinding choice, it, like everything with the hook blade, felt wonderful. The zipline, however, was the centerpiece of Revelation's movement. You don't need me to tell you how it worked, but man, did it work very nicely. The momentum was smooth, but you could slow yourself down for accuracy. You could cancel at any moment. You could air assassinate, even cleanly onto guards at the end of the zipline, as inconsistent as the animation could be. But best of all, you could catch ledge onto ziplines, allowing for spectacular moments of flow and style, and a boosted skill ceiling for the advanced Pathfinder. The flair of parkour in Assassin's Creed Revelations was unmatched. Constantinople's wild structure and the hook blade combined made movement big, and always so, in the form of a lamp, a lift, a line, or a 40-foot drop. Opportunities for large change were always about, and often worth taking. But simpler than that was its unmatched character. Where Brotherhood feels like more Assassin's Creed, movement here is its own experience, colored by Constantinople's unique personality and the hook blade's consistent relevance. We had speed to be thankful for too. Parkour hadn't been so fast since Venice, and it would never be so fast again. Even the rivers of Venice found their last hurrah in Constantinople. Depending on your destination and the zipline's direction, they were sometimes worth taking, and sometimes they weren't. Never again would I wonder which method of movement was best, not even in the game with the most methods of movement. Assassin's Creed Syndicate. The carriages. The carriages were always fastest. Well, fuck. Fine. London wasn't an easy setting, but having learned nothing from previous mistakes, they were also the shallowest mounts had yet been. Then there was the train, which was shallow, obviously, and the rope launcher, a hook blade with infinite reach, a zipline with unlimited purpose, a response to the magnitude of everything in 1-to-1 scale London, and shallow. Ultimately, you picked whichever was coolest or most tolerable at the time. When it came to doing something interesting with movement, Syndicate's greatest victory was found between London, on the River Thames. And that was remarkable because dummy thick AC rivers don't exactly have a good track record. Constantinople is divided between Europe and Asia by the Bosphorus Strait. And unfortunately for us, you can't parkour on water. You couldn't do much else either. There were no ships, no one else, not even a zipline. Come on, Ubisoft. What you could do was one of two things. Row, which definitely didn't highlight the emptiness of the Bosphorus to the point the game seemed broken, or fast travel, the mechanical equivalent of giving up. 4 years later, the Thames presented the exact same problem, but this time Ubisoft had a solution. Bollocks to emptiness and bollocks to bringing back usable boats. Put so much life and movement in the river that the player can literally hop across it, with only brief gaps from lane to lane. Important gaps, because they created the challenge. Gaps meant you had to consider the lane ahead of you and adapt so as to continue your progress uninterrupted. With limited time and obstructed sightlines, there was only so good you could get. But you could get good. At a river. This was the love child of Frogger and knife crime. Enemies, loot, and other activities floated by from boat to boat. They introduced small variation into the movement loop and served as incentives to make different choices during the process. But this was nothing new. This has always been the purpose, or just the effect, of all the micro-activities you're likely to encounter during movement. Dropping 50 feet into a detachment of irresistibly placed guards, engaging in combat for a short time, then beginning another ascent is a cycle of refreshment that punctuates and improves movement in every Assassin's Creed, both by providing a break from it, but also by encouraging you to descend, then ascend again. This is one of the reasons the practically infinite range of air assassination is such a good thing. It makes variation tempting. Rooftop guards could provide a similar pause if you choose to engage, or they could be something to consciously avoid if not. Either way, you're thinking differently. In Syndicate, it's finding a carriage to chase, or a train to rob, or a gang war to resolve, or one of the 30 billion liberation activities. In Unity, it's the criminals and robbers that entice you to come down. And it's not always combat. Sometimes it's a literal reward that serves as incentive for a pathfinding challenge. They can be as simple as a small diversion as it is with Revelations and Black Flag's Animus fragments, or Unity's cockades. But as for many of Brotherhood's flags, they can be so hard as to slow you to a considered approach. And moving into the Kenway saga, they even started to run away. Manuscripts and shanties follow in the much more literal footsteps of the robbers and messengers of games before, but it was just as likely the target of pursuit was you. Chase and escape have been important to this franchise since Assassin's Creed 1, whose core gameplay loop honored the historical identity of the Order, killers who intended to be seen, so for whom pursuit would naturally follow. But something was consistent amongst all these things, and everything with relevance to movement, something they almost never managed to do. They almost never made a challenge of movement itself. Think about it. How often in Assassin's Creed does it matter whether or not you're good at parkour? How often would it make a difference to success or failure? Even for an accessible game, it's remarkably rare. Its races and timed activities give you so much fucking time that you could book a flight and get there in real life. The problem isn't that it leaves us without reason to be fast. We already have one. Being fast, we don't need an objective to make us want to be quick. Efficiency is its own motive. What a true extrinsic challenge could provide is encouragement to learn how to be quick. Difficulty can be a powerful pressure, the push we needed, given Assassin's Creed's inability to teach its depth in any other way. The difficulty, for instance, of something as simple as a leaderboard. The difficulty, perhaps, of multiplayer races in Unity, or the difficulty of a gold medal boundary, like Gran Turismo, or Mirror's Edge, or Catalyst, or Prototype, like Brotherhood's fantastic VR race courses, except not buried in a menu where players only expect to be taught the absolute basics, not confined to a single entry, and not confined to a set route. The problem with specified race courses in a custom environment no less is that you can't learn pathfinding when there's only one reasonable option. Still, Brotherhood got close, to the bare minimum, and nothing like it would ever be seen again. But there are other ways to do it, and other times Assassin's Creed almost got there. Chase and escape, as important to the fantasy of the assassins as the fantasy of parkour itself, and that's why we're going to talk about them. But in certain games, they have even been important as exceptions to this trend, though it did take them a while to get on their feet. Escape had the potential to make for memorable moments in Assassin's Creed 1, but largely it was a pressure you dealt with by simply doing the same thing you were already doing, moving, with some competence, in a particular direction, and if not that, then hiding. But you better hope it was that, because hiding was fucking boring. Then came Assassin's Creed 2, where hiding was still boring, escape outright was even easier thanks to a smaller circle of pursuit, and where the context had changed, against its favor. What motivates escape is the difficulty of combat, the chances you'll suffer when the threat grows too great. That was possible in the first game, and far less so in the second. And how come no one told Jesper Kid? He composed his nuts off for an event that almost never lasted long enough for the beat to drop. The new chase system, however, got off to a far better start. Thieves and messengers were random, common, and loaded with cash. That was the incentive, but they had to be left alive unless you wanted to waste time looting the body, and notoriety as punishment, Assassin's Creed 2's new method of simulating public image. With tackling in mind, chase half worked. It worked in the sense that messengers were fast, and skill made a real difference in catching them. Well, fuck. We've done it, boys. Yeah, not quite. Unfortunately, your parkour skill wasn't the only thing being tested, so was your patience, and your ability to find a tackle context that works for the absurd limitations of the software. Classic Creed often struggled to cope with the complexity of its own environments, and nowhere was that more consistently apparent than Chase, where tackles made without perfect conditions were certain to fuck up something. It might just look bad, but it might fall apart entirely, and all the while the game's human-to-human collision system overbears, having Ezio and his target bouncing off each other at the slightest contact. It certainly didn't help that the tackle button becomes the drop button depending on an unclear distance, or that there's no priority targeting on the tackle when other NPCs are nearby, or that the normal and aerial tackle are the same button, which means civilians 40 feet below you could be chosen over the messenger in front of you. UB Clunk made Chase slapstick. As Ezio slipped on yet another mechanical banana peel, the fantasy was thoroughly obliterated. But the fun of Chase survived. The clunk was shameful, but for the most part it was also predictable. The consistent incompetence of the system created valid limitations to play around. A challenge where genuine movement skill made some difference. And if nothing else, at least you got a laugh. Brotherhood changed nothing and benefited where it could in equal measure. Revelations cut Chase entirely. Then, Assassin's Creed 3 changed everything. Chase was back, though not perhaps how we wanted it. 3's solution to the clunk of Chase previously was confining messengers to the ground. If they're on the ground, then you have to be too, because streets in New York are that much faster than the roofs. The test now was of your patience. Escape, on the other hand, well, I can see where the budget went.
Lad, are you dumb? Are you getting rude, man? That's what you get, fam. Push you. Yeah, blood.
The backbone of Escape was Assassin's Creed 3's new notoriety system. It was harsher, vastly so. At level 3, guards would kill on sight. It was also far easier to become notorious, because the effect was now proportional. In Assassin's Creed 2, you had to fill the entire bar to experience the punishment, and then deplete the entire bar to remove it. But in Assassin's Creed 3, the punishment rose and fell with progress. Level 1 caused instant suspicion. Level 2 made you a sussy baka, and each level created better conditions for violence, so escalation became increasingly likely. But what matters most is that it all existed in a context of massive enemy population. New York and Boston hosted entire armies. By level 3, every corner you turned added someone new to the chase, and Jaegers would spawn city-wide to hunt you down. The event felt massive, and we got our extrinsic motivation back. Combat was easier than ever, but the enemies never stopped coming, so escape was a reasonable idea. Social acceptance became something to respect, and the result of its defiance became exactly what I wished for, a challenge. It was a steroid dose that affected every dimension, even and especially to art and fantasy. As I hope you can currently tell, Chase AI formed blockades with greater willingness, predictive accuracy, and thanks to their muskets, range, all improving the impression of intelligence and immersion as a result, but also their ability to impact play. The better they are, the more likely you'll be to change your approach, and to inhabit the fantasy role of an escapee under threat of an overwhelming force. Unlike Ezio, who was always in control of where the run would go. The constant pelting of musket fire, though inaccurate, brought size to the spectacle, while Connor's basic motions gave it greater definition. Momentum was the operative word during Assassin's Creed 3's overhaul of player animation. When Connor moves, his weight doesn't want to stop, and his practiced agility responds in a clear and satisfying motion. You can see, in detail, his very exertion, the strength yet the imperfection of how he dodges passers-by, as if a last-moment reflex, all of it heightening the drama of movement. Even the kills wanted to keep things moving. The momentum that went into high-profile assassinations came right back out. And then there were the chase breakers. Scripted animations, but I am not fucking complaining. Look at them. Holy macaroni, mate. Movement through Escape had an unprecedented cinematic intensity to complement its newfound mechanical bite, and though Jesper Kyd never got to see it, Lorne Balfe's thundering war sound got the job done and then some. The tension, pain, and brutality that defined Assassin's Creed 3 echoed as a new soul for movement. Youth and play had become drive and drama throughout the game, but these hunts were its clearest embodiment. Never again would parkour have any artistic involvement in Assassin's Creed. And fear not, it might sound like I have nothing but praise, but I'll always find something to bitch about. Popular opinion on Assassin's Creed 3's Escape is mixed. Some found its difficulty oppressively punishing, and from the perspective of players fresh from the Ezio games, it's easy to imagine why. Escape was now not ridiculously trivial. That'll cause whiplash alone. But in Assassin's Creed 3, the strategies we were accustomed to were now useful only in the short term. You could still escape the escape, you could still hide, but if you're at 3 stars, you'll have to do it all over again the moment another guard sees you. This seemed ridiculous. We did not realize that notoriety was now inseparable from pursuit, and if we wanted to lose the heat, we were going to have to remove the heat. One poster was all it took for level 3 to become level 2, and you could remove posters at any state of detection. Notoriety would just as easily de-escalate, and though this means oppressive difficulty was demonstrably a myth, I can't lay all the blame at the feet of those stuck in the past. Pulling down posters as a way to escape an active pursuit? That is silly. It makes very little diegetic sense. It may not seem intended, which may make it harder to intuit. It was a problem. The biggest problem with Connor's escape, however, was the same as the problem with all movement in Assassin's Creed 3. It was in prison, imprisoned by America. Never does parkour feel faster in this game than it does during Escape. Those firing squads make a strong push upward, and Jaegers struggle to reach their top speed on rooftops. But it's still in New York, and to put it gently, New York sucks enormous gorilla dick. It's painfully uniform, and it's uniformly meager. The same shapes of buildings, the same lines of one-dimensional parkour objects on their side. There is a new challenge to find on every visit to Tuscany. But no matter the pressure, there is only so far parkour can be pushed in New York, where level design was at its barest bones yet. It's dull coming from Rome, let alone Constantinople. But I still think Escape kicks ass. With a system closer to GTA's police than ever before, Assassin's Creed 3 made your violence mean something, in a way that felt like Escape should, in a way that fit artistically, and in a way that sometimes managed to make your skill mean something too. Even the player who only wanted to push the sandbox to its limits, to go on a rampage or a city-spanning chase, for the first time consistently could. Assassin's Creed 3 had got somewhere. They were this close to getting it right. Well, Black Flag improved the level design, Kingston sucked and Havana was nothing remarkable, but we got some welcome variation back. It even brought new chase breakers. Unfortunately, it forgot to bring the chases. Scatterbrain. There was no one to chase, so that's gone. An Escape? Pathetic. Enemy population was low, they didn't carry muskets, the circle of pursuit was tiny, and there was no notoriety at all. For the first time since AC1, Escape had become a pressure to simply ignore. Which of course makes total sense because nobody associates Escape with pirates. No, I don't think that's ever been done before, and pirates were never hunted or anything like that. And pirates being hunted, the patience of the British wearing thin, I'm pretty sure that's not the basis for all the game's narrative conflicts. Oh wait, it is! How better to highlight that accepting the King's Peace might have been a good idea than by communicating that pressure mechanically? How better to highlight your dominance at sea than to make you feel hunted on dry land? How better to not be a complete sinus than to take the system you almost had right and introduce those last refinements that could get it where it needed to be, inches away? Ubisoft instead chose to abandon its potential. Never again would Chase or Escape have any major relevance in Assassin's Creed. Escape in Unity was performed by moving upwards, and Chase was only a slight improvement on AC3. Syndicate dropped both. Never again would Pursuit vary movement on a mechanical level or on the level of fantasy. And never again would Assassin's Creed have the balls to make an extrinsic challenge of movement itself, adding further to the needless inaccessibility of its depth. There was an attempt to address one of the other things that contributed to that problem in Assassin's Creed 3. To prevent auto-parkour flinging the inexperienced player to their doom, Connor would now stop himself before making an unsafe jump, and a hold or tap of the jump button could override the safety net. Congratulations, Ubisoft. No, I'm serious, it worked. If you knew what you were doing, your freedom went unhindered. If not, you were safe. But that was not the only way Assassin's Creed 3 tampered with the fundamentals of parkour. The auto parkour button. Until now, it was actually a combo. You had to hold high profile and legs at the same time. 2 buttons at the same time? No one can do that, Ubisoft recognized. It must be made simpler, no matter the cost. There is now 1 parkour button, which means only 2 movement speeds, running and walking. But without the jog that used to sit between, how are we supposed to implement button discipline to avoid mistaken climbs without slamming the brakes by dropping to a walk, destroying flow, efficiency, and fantasy, destroying the chances a player discovers or decides to use it? And there's nowhere I'd like to lose control less than New York and Boston, whose jank doorways, windows, and market stalls make misclimbs all the more likely. Congratulations, Ubisoft. That one wasn't serious. And we're not done yet. Remember Climb Leap? The Kenway games don't. Remember ejects? You can still eject during the first half of a wall run, but you can't eject during the second half until the animation completes. Well, why the fuck not? These are flat reductions on possibility. They amount to a shackle, and for what? We always took it for granted that the assassin would do what we asked when we asked. We could never take that for granted again. All the Kenway games suffer from these inexplicable limits and play like a baby's first version of the system we were used to. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Why is this franchise so sickened by its own potential? Cool, huh? If you have any love for Assassin's Creed at all, you've probably seen a clip like that before. A TikTok or a YouTube short or a JSERS video, and you probably thought, damn, why was that system confined to a single game? How, in one entry, did we go from movement that looks like it's in a game to movement that looks better than it could in reality? And maybe then you'll reinstall it. I know I certainly did. Unity's extended moveset is an utter joy. It's hard to go back after getting used to the freedom of diagonal wall runs, diagonal mounts, sliding down sloped roofs and jumping off them with momentum conserved. That fucking rope swing, man. Holy shit. You know what else is hard? Wrapping your head around the animation blending. The environments are so complex, there must be so many possibilities, but somehow Arno makes it look right. It's especially nice to have descents that look good, with a dedicated free run down, and ascents that don't unintentionally trigger with a separate button for free run up. Shit, what a solution. It's dub after dub. But keep playing, and you will eventually understand why the hottest debate amongst the fanbase is whether Unity is even better than Assassin's Creed 1. Let me put Arno into context. Paris is a dream, in the sense that it's everything you could wish for, and in the sense that it's hard to believe. How can it still look like it belongs on the next generation of consoles 8 years later? And how did that come without sacrifice to the mechanical base it provides? 4 stories as standard, lathed in juts, ledges, ropes and platforms, street lamps as stepping stones, ladders and chimneys on the rooftops, slopes and all sorts of different heights click together, hollow insides allowing parkour for the first time to seamlessly flow through the city as well as over it and under it. It's 40 square kilometers, and all of it's elaborate, endlessly reconfiguring. I do not say this without due consideration. It's a masterpiece. No other city in a video game ever has been rendered in such detail or fidelity, and provided so strong a mechanical basis for gameplay. But we know by now that level design only means so much if it isn't honored by the moveset of its assassin. Among the many things Unity revolutionized was the snap targeting system. Fundamentally, snap targeting is a mild form of mind reading. If it guesses where you want it to go, it has succeeded. If you're surprised by what it does, it has failed. And admittedly, there are times its task is impossible, especially so in a city like Paris. Faced with tens of possible intentions, all it has to go off is a button and a camera angle. This inevitably leads to small inaccuracies. I catch the wrong chimney, fall to a platform meters away from where I was aiming. It always sucks, but I would forgive it if Paris was its only problem. For every case that even a working snap targeting system would have struggled with, there are 3 that proves Unity's isn't working. Like this. Or this. Or this. The inexplicable misjump is a common and baffling problem, with the only consistent hotspot being the huge overprioritization of random clutter, small chimneys and tiny outcrops on roofs, tables, stools and wheelbarrows on the ground. All things you'd never intend to land on, and so always things you'll be surprised by when you inevitably do. Why the fuck would I ever want to jump on top of a chest? But it gets so much worse than that. Every assassin until now has obeyed consistent limits. You knew exactly how far and how high they could jump. You could predict them, which meant you could plan ahead. But Arno makes a habit of breaking his own rules. This is the typical Arno jump. Bearing that in mind, how could you predict that Arno would then do this? It's not just the distance, it's the speed and that he loses no height. If this jump is far enough to force a clamber, why does this further jump cause a hop? Why doesn't this jump force a clamber? And it works backwards. If I know he can jump incredible distances even with acceptable speed and gravity, why can he not do the same here? Or here? Why is he refusing to jump towards this close and clearly specified ladder? What creates the impression of further inconsistency is the over-prioritization of platform edges. You'll often mean to make a basic leap, but snap to a step 4 feet in front of you. You'll often mean to jump off a rooftop, but snap slightly further on the same rooftop. It seems Arno can barely move his weight as often as dash it into space. I will never intend for something impossible to happen, for something pointless to happen, or for the rules to be broken, so it will always be surprising when Arno drops or gains half his strength in a moment, slip space jumps, or turns on his Sandevistan. The problems continue, perhaps as a sacrifice for the fidelity of animation, or perhaps because everything in Unity is unfinished. Arno's input response frequently threatens to knock him out of sync with your intentions. His sluggish turning speed can easily lead to misalignment, especially so whilst running on canopies. Heavy-handed input queuing can also cause a desync, and especially often when you're surprised by a sudden burst of speed. Things are not looking good. Free run up and down are Unity's attempt to control the problems a snap targeting system would face in an environment like Paris. The player is given an intuitive means to provide it direction, and in practice, it does have its successes. On the typical Parisian building face, adorned with a dense arrangement of targets above and below you, free run up and down turns certain chaos into workable freedom, but they are no exemption from Unity's unfinished targeting or unfinished everything, and for each problem they solve, they cause another. Free run up always favors jumps, to such a degree that you'll jump, even if the only place a jump could land is the ground, which means there are times free run up is the worst choice possible for staying elevated, and the best choice possible for going down. If you release free run up, however, and enter free run neutral, what Arno will do instead is wall catch, which can often put you in range of a side eject back onto the platforms. You are never told the wall catch exists, and things are no better for free run down. You can do lots of things from a swing state in Unity. You can lash A, you can swing up, you can swing down. But if you're above a swing point, there is only one way to get into a swing state smoothly, and that is by free running down from an adjacent object, provided that there is no other object a safe distance below you. If there is, and there is likely to be, Arno will always prioritize it, making a smooth transition into the swing completely inaccessible. Too often are you denied the possibility of precision by the assumption that you would always want to make a complete descent. Depending entirely on the environment, it can be harder to step down to a platform immediately in front of you than to drop greatly further. Could things get any worse? Yep. Remember what I said about catch ledge earlier? Most importantly, it allowed us to correct the mistakes of the snap targeting. That's right. Well, you wanna guess? Catch ledge is fucking gone. As documented by Leo K, all that survives of this once critical ability is breakfall, which offers no extended reach, no directional control, and fucking no reliability, including the ability to manually wall catch as we could 7 years before. In Paris, we are abandoned to the whims of unfinished code, and forced to suffer the frustrations of being thrown off course and the endless minor, clownish imprecisions. What I'd like to draw special attention to is the back eject. If jumps are 25% less reliable than they used to be, the back eject is 25% reliable. When it works, it has strength enough to cross great distance and still ascend. It can be the fastest way to climb 2 close buildings. My surprise then is inevitable when sometimes it can't even manage this, or this. Or when it refuses to mount a platform Arno is physically touching, or refuses to snap to a target in rimming distance from the arc. An identifiable, though utterly illogical consistency is that you cannot back eject into a ledge grab, or any state where your feet would be hanging freely. Why? Fuck knows, but that's what explains moments like this. The back eject isn't a bit broken, it's completely broken. And it would contribute to Unity's unpredictability if I was ever insane enough to try using it, expecting a predicted outcome. Just thought you should know. But what's really interesting about the back eject is how you do it. You press the back eject button. Crazy, right? No, it is crazy, because much of Unity's moveset is contextual. There is no side eject button. You do it by putting yourself in a position where you can do it, and then pointing to the side. This may sound like another recipe for disaster, but side ejects were only useful in specific places to begin with. If you can rely on the game to recognize such places, then maybe Unity gets a win. The move becomes more accessible at the sacrifice of very little freedom, but we are not in an ideal world. The context detection system makes the snap targeting look perfect. Context consistencies are never tutorialized. They are often illogical, imperceptible, and completely impossible to intuit. That is, when they have any consistencies whatsoever. The critical functions of the side eject survive the trip to Paris. You can still use them to skip clambers and employ stair-seeking to initiate fresh wall runs. In this typical situation, the most consistent problem you're going to face is being too close to your target. Not too far, too close, to such a degree that makes very little sense. What you must then do is shuffle or leap further away from where you're going, hit the context, and eject back over. It's ridiculous, and the problems go on as we go up. If your hands are on the far side of a window dormer relative to the one you're aiming for, you can't eject, even though Arno can eject thrice that distance if, for example, you start from the flat space between. And that about covers what is consistent. Then there's everything else. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of side eject contexts that should work but don't. And for every reason you could imagine as to why, there is a contradictory example to sow confusion and to prevent you from ruling out any particular angle, length, or shape. Here is Arno refusing a downward. Here is Arno making a downward. Here is Arno refusing an upward. Here is Arno ejecting into the stratosphere with the same controls. Well, what about length? This seems too far. But how can that be true when 100 other cases prove Arno can skip his ass into Spain? And as with angle and length, the same goes for shape. Why this? But not this. Why this? But not this. In certain cases, holding free run up can help reach the furthest of multiple valid targets, or a previously inaccessible target above you. For the 3 people who know that, it's a useful though unreliable trick. Otherwise, the only consistency is that there is none you'll ever know, and so you'll continue to try, and continue to be punished for it. When you fail a side eject, you don't just not do it. If you're out of context, the directional input will return to its original function, which above a platform could have Arno dismount, on a building face could have Arno slowly, brokenly shimmy onto the target, or if your eject involves free run up, it could have Arno fling himself halfway across Paris. Whatever it is, it's a punishment. Your time is wasted, your flow is broken, and it's a punishment you will receive at practical random, as you continue to believe contexts that aren't there might be. Ejects are a dice roll, defined by surprise, and I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but even if they worked, they'd be down 1 testicle. The inevitable problem with contextual side ejects is that there's every chance a context is entered accidentally. During the process of correcting a failed eject, you'll often stumble into the context of another. Or take this pillar for instance, which I only intend to scale, but then I enter a context, and off I fucking trot. And what about the functions that didn't survive the trip to Paris? You can no longer eject into a grab state, which massively curtails its potential uses, and completing the downward trend of restriction ejection begun in AC3, wall runs are now uncancelable. Because you can only eject at the top, for targets like this, you'll have to go all the way up, then all the way down. The rest of Arno's contextual moveset doesn't fare much better. Access to the twisty swing descent, for instance, can be denied if there's an object a safe distance below you. Why? Why assume I always want what's lowest? What if the twist puts me in a better position for a subsequent move as it does here? What if I just think the twist is cooler? Why does my moveset fundamentally change based on proximity to the floor? And why isn't there just a button to solve this? Access to the free run neutral wall catch can be denied for similar reasons. If there's something close to snap to, a critical move for remaining elevated might be blocked. And the same thing goes for the reverse/A swing. If there's a preferable object in front of Arno, he won't reverse/A. But that's probably not the reason you've never done a reverse/A. You've probably never heard of it. This is Unity's vault mechanic, and it would have stayed a secret if it weren't for JSERS and SADDE documenting a consistent control input earlier this year. The reverse/A, when context detection allows it, is my favorite move in Unity. It's in the top 10 most coolest things ever, and it's a remarkably fat-ass bonus to pathfinding possibility. A 99.9% of players will never know it exists. Whatever the reason as to why, it isn't good enough. And then come the troubles of the swing dive. In AC1, you look at the pole, you jump towards it, but 9 times out of 10, you'll swing dive. Unity immediately makes things more complicated by allowing Arno to jump on top of ropes as readily as swing from them. What you need is a way to tell what context you're in, or an input to influence what context you're in. And maybe they exist, but you'll never find them. Free run down is usually the right button to press, but just as often you'll descend the building you were already on. You could also try pressing free run up instead. It may work, it often won't. There are times that Unity would rather throw you to your death than initiate a dive. Hey, you might fucking quantum tunnel. It is saying very little that ledge dives are somewhat more consistent. And the same thing can happen with inverted intentions. What if I did want to descend the building I was on, but Arno dove across the street instead? These are no small discrepancies. Arno's dives and swings can make a 30-meter difference, or change what side of the street you're on, and the best players in the world can't predict the outcome every time. This does not just mean that Arno's coolest and most impactful moves are frustratingly difficult to use or learn, it also means there's every chance you stumble into them by accident. The flaws of Unity's contextual moveset amount to another big, infuriating contribution to the average experience of its movement. Reaction to surprise, the frustrations of broken plans, and the furious assault of Unity's shattered code on pathfinding depth. It's not just the clever roots of classic Creed thought 10 steps ahead. It's the short-term, subconscious plans formed the instant you see somewhere you want to be, and all the ways to get there. In Unity, there is every chance it falls apart by step 2. You flew somewhere you didn't expect. That wasn't the context you needed it to be. You glitched out. Consistencies can be so small and strange that advanced mastery only comes as the product of intense trial and error. But why would anyone do that? How could anyone call this the bar for parkour, or compare it to Assassin's Creed 1? Good question, but all I need to do is play a clip like this to answer. A clip like the one you've probably seen before. It's the potential, what it can be and sometimes is, the high you chase. Unity is so foundationally strong in animation, moveset, and level design that one good jump is satisfying enough to motivate the 5 shit ones after, or the 499 attempts it took to hit the full version of the clip you saw at the start. The system that would have embarrassed Assassin's Creed 1 is in this game. We just needed control, be it with consistent context, trusting the player with buttons to prioritize certain moves, or catch fucking ledge. If we could actually play Unity, by a light year it would have the best parkour. Not just of Assassin's Creed. They were this damn close. Next came Syndicate. This won't take 15 minutes to cover. The snap targeting is still insane. Side ejects are still a roll of the dice. Your moveset still changes based on your distance to the ground, and things are still generally broken. Ubisoft never tried to correct it, because this is the end of parkour. Let's not get distracted by the inherent problems on-foot movement would always face in a city as large as London. London is not the reason climb leaps are now the only way to climb, removing all possibility of precision, or that the back eject is now so weak it can almost never gain height, or that despite the praiseworthy addition of eject into swing, the targeting is so reluctant to let you eject that it might as well not have bothered, or that diagonal wall runs and wall catches often look terrible despite simpler environments, or that most eject animations are just gone, or that diagonal mounts are gone, or that the jump itself is gone. You can't jump, at least not at will, which means gone is the common depth of optimizing movement by jumping to shorten climbs or simply because a jump is faster across any given distance. Whether or not these optimizations will be made at all is entirely up to the whims of the assassin's targeting, and for every one they get right, they refuse another, no matter how easy or how obvious, adding further frustration to your complete lack of control. But of all the ways to suffocate in Victorian London, none is worse than the new limitations of Jacob and Evie's range. They will not jump to distant targets, and without a manual button to override their childish desire for personal safety. Many of the jumps available to any other assassin cannot happen in Syndicate. This, for example. Or this. Or this. I could make half the jumps they refuse and I'm a fucking YouTuber. Speed, precision, and fantasy. Each shot in the dick. The same absurd restrictions also apply to Syndicate's new impotent back eject. Evie shakes her head to refuse all unsafe distances, but most distances she considers unsafe would have been safe for any other assassin. Syndicate is game design self-harm. Everything Unity gave it, it made lesser, and what Unity needed most is what Syndicate took away. Control. But it's not just what Unity could have been, it's what Syndicate could have been too. Let's clear the air. London was a massive problem for assassin-like movement. Literally, a massive problem. But if the Thames has proven anything, it's that did not mean there was no solution. In fact, Ubisoft almost found it. An Assassin's Creed grappling hook. The potential. Imagine it. A big-budget hook blade. Something to tie the inevitably sparser parkour objects together, with the speed required to compete in a super city, and a moveset not only of depth, but of character. The rope launcher could have been so much more than shallow and static. It could have augmented parkour. Instead, it replaced it. The assisted mechanism removes the need to consider incline or gravity, which combined with its incredible range removes the need to consider aim altogether, and simultaneously allows it to ignore building faces, where parkour is most relevant, by skipping straight from roof to roof. Its moveset is 2 moves wide. You can go up and forward. There is one animation for each, and neither is as good as it needs to be. You cannot go down. You can't even do what the damn thing was sold on, because you can't rope launch from mid-air. There is no fine control on the upwards launch. You can't stop it. You can't move it. You can't speed it up because there is nothing to master. It is the most important mechanic in the game, yet it behaves more like a cheat code. And that truly does rid movement of everything, even the basic fantasy. You can grapple to the height of Big Ben in a moment, and it means nothing. There's no thrill because there's no danger. There's no satisfaction because there's no effort. There's nothing. Just the staggering beauty of London. And for the first time in Assassin's Creed, an emptiness and a boredom to movement. Refinements away from the greatest parkour system there has ever been. The slightest effort from destroying it altogether. Ubisoft chose instead to abandon their potential. This is the tragedy of parkour. Unmet potential. So what's next? Origins? Odyssey and Valhalla? I have nothing to say that'll surprise you. Like that I love Assassin's Creed Origins, or that the reason I love it most is the one way it is truly like what came before. The depth and wonder of the ancient world. Ubisoft's latest masterpiece. Egypt. Greece and England are the best qualities of Odyssey and Valhalla too, but I don't like moving in them. Any of them. And I could tell you why the excuses don't hold up. That the existence of deserts in Egypt does not explain why its cities, towns, and villages, many of which are perfect for assassin-like movement, feature half-hearted parkour level design at best. That the fields of England aren't what took away jump range, the utility and reliability of side ejects, diagonal wall runs, or a sprint button. But the truth is, I don't know whether to criticize Valhalla for having bad parkour, or for having any parkour. Why would a Viking tightrope walk? How does parkour fit in games designed from narrative to combat for the fantasy of specific historical roles? Not assassins, not their creed, or any of the things that characterize them. Their style, their speed, their stealth, their belief. By Odyssey, we couldn't even take their presence for granted. Combat was a gamey, imprecise hack and slash, and Assassin's Creed had finally made its movement mechanic feel like a gimmick. Ubisoft won't admit it, because they make too much money from the brand name, but as you have likely heard declared in comment sections from YouTube to Twitter for the past 7 years. This is something else now. Not something worse, but something different, and the old Assassin's Creed is dead. It's been dead since Syndicate. Origins was just life support. As resentful as I am, and as anyone is right to be of Ubisoft stringing us along with a misleading title, it's been 8 entries. Shouldn't it be? Shouldn't I be over it? But I'm not, because it's not just dead. It died too soon. It died with an unfinished central mechanic that never got to reach its heights. And not everyone wants to hear this, but parkour is not alone. If anything, it's a microcosm. Assassin's Creed has never met its potential. It was always a franchise that had to be tolerated. It was always held back by rush development for yearly releases, tyrannical jank, bonkers control schemes, and perpetually underdeveloped gameplay systems, copied unfixed from one entry to the next that still fell to pieces when combatants were on more than one plane in the 4th entry of what was already a multi-million-dollar franchise. We argue over which combat or stealth is best, as if the prime strategy in what is considered the peak of the franchise wasn't trying to make the pick-up weapon button work, or as if there's more than 2 Assassin's Creed combat systems that aren't mediocre in any other light. I know that assassinness was something special because given every other option, people chose to play games as flawed as these, for their timeless fantasy, their mighty hearts, and their golden worlds. It was always worth it, but it shouldn't have had to be. We shouldn't have had to tolerate outdated design, or backward evolution, what seemed to be a contractual obligation to break something or to abandon a series' strength for every new one introduced. Remember Social Stealth? The emphasis on blending, the hired factions? It was unique, evocative, and it could have been great if it ever received the refinements it needed, but it received nothing. It was repeated, unaddressed, then abandoned, just like the vast weapon sandbox of the Ezio trilogy. The trade of movesets made a combat system in desperate need of polish, expressive, badass, and above all, fun. But it was never polished. For all three successes, Black Flag was just as broken and had a fraction of the breadth, and then it was reduced to nothing but an overfamiliar attack-counter rhythm. And what exemplifies this trend better than movement? We had escape, but no chase. We had chase, but no escape. We had fluidity, but imprison. Fidelity, but no soul. We had choice, but no balance. We had a world of possibility and no way to choose. We had beauty, but only when we were allowed to see it. We had less clunk, but less depth. And when we had depth, it was so often kept secret. Again, and again, and again. We had a shot, a chance at Assassin's Creed getting the revolution it needed in the next generation, but it stopped 10 yards short of the finish line, and then they gave up. If Assassin's Creed is a cancelled TV show, then Unity is the trailer for its unmade final season. The idea of Unity is more popular than the experience of it. People want to believe its parkour is as consistent as it looks in the YouTube shorts, but I'm sorry, it's just not. The heights of Assassin's Creed have never been reached, and that's why it's hard to let go. This franchise doesn't have its Arkham City or its Far Cry 3. Even Brotherhood is weighed down by systems as ancient as the ruins it's set in, and an unfinished story. Assassin's Creed has so much higher to climb, and we have so much more to see. And in a matter of months, we just might. Mirage will be Ubisoft's 9th try. The fanbase looks on in high spirits but prepare for the worst, warned that what they hope will change things started life as a DLC for Valhalla. I dread to think what this will mean. Ubisoft have not designed Assassins for almost 8 years now, and the quality across all of their flagship franchises has been in steady decline for almost 5. Are they still capable? Do they even deserve the chance? It is not an easy thing to want Assassin's Creed to succeed, not because I am tired, but because I am troubled by the notion that Mirage would feel less like Salvation and more like a retread if Unity or Brotherhood were finished. How much more will I spend on this franchise because it isn't finished? I have no doubt that Mirage will capture the imagery and resemble from a glance the games we were used to, but will it understand the source of their depth, the nature of their heart, their problems and how to fix them, or will it reveal itself after a few hours of play as exactly its namesake, an illusion of fleeting satisfaction that leaves us once again wanting more? Mirage will be the next of too many entries, but I do still think the world would suffer if Assassin's Creed died too soon. Special thanks go out to Brybase, Chase Baker, Chino, Dr. Pavel, Eli Weaver, Fat Guy 688, G Series, John C, John Lemley, Joshua Lovejoy, Lex Williams, L Hudson, MT the Poet, Newts, Storyteller Max, Save, The Wayfinder 12, William Vossler, Warthol, E Blanrhyme, Andre Baltuta, Anton, Attila, Bloth, Bozian, Brandon Harris, Caleb Finnemore, Calvin Black, Colby the Ranchman, Combat Wombat, Corey Walterbeek, Dan Walker, Deluxo, Dennis Williams, Dominic Jaworski, Dylan Schaefer-Murphy, Floyd Dibben, George Garegian, Hidibari, Holy Shift. I joined Tier 3 because I wanted to hear Whitelight say this out loud. I pay my cam girls, so why not you? Jason H, Joe Simmons, Joshua W. Schreiner, Kieran Dries, Malone Patron, Milo W, Monochrome Only, Nathan, Navy Husky, Pitstab, Purple Peepee, Rakin Hock, Ray Cantwell, Rollo Runner, Shade, Shahzabe Arshad Mirza, The Maid Casca, The Last Great Opium Den, Trending Tech, Vincent DeLuca, and Voy.